Viewpoint, program of personality, politicians, and perspectives. And a great morning it is. Yesterday was a little bit different. Three of us hit the golf course and finally gave up after 9 holes because it was too cool.
Well, you ought to be out there today. It's supposed to be 81.
Well, work comes first, you know. Work.
Such a dedicated employee. Jim, you should be grateful you've got this man. This is a gift to you.
Football season's here. You might have noticed.
I did. And Thursday night, now tomorrow night, you may want to be aware that the Vikings and the Packers are playing.
The Packers did a number on my Bears the other day.
Yeah, they did.
Shaggy dog story, since it's football time. A fella asked, how many Michigan freshmen does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer was none. That's a sophomore course.
Jim liked that one.
Shaggy dog story. Another bad one. 2 Texas A&M players walk around. The guy says, look, there's a dead bird. The other guy looked up and says, where?
Oh,
All right. Okay, good. Enough silliness.
Say, but you mentioned Michigan. You know, their coach is in a little bit of trouble there. Boy, they are certainly zeroing in on playing people who maybe shouldn't be out there getting their head bonked around. Be like Bronco Nagurski, who ran down the field, made a touchdown, and then he was lying there in the end zone, and they said, John. He said, who was that last guy I hit? Well, it was the goalpost. And he knocked himself out.
You know, you might have heard that I have somewhat of a prejudicial interest in Lincoln College.
I never figured that.
The rumor's out.
Gee, we hadn't heard that, had we? It's just like the White House didn't know that ISIS was going to be a problem.
or the security might be a problem.
Yeah. Have you heard of ADT?
Okay, this morning, kudo. The maintenance staff out there at Lincoln College did a superb job of setting up and transforming our basketball court, which is in the Jack Nutt Arena, appropriately named. And the court is named for Al Pickering and Tom Zurkemmer, which is nice. But anyway, they transformed a basketball court into a magical place, and you were there, Judith Kay.
I was.
It looked just great. A lot of work went into that. And then, of course, before we were still leaving, they had to start tearing it down to get ready for the regular use of the building. Great job out there. Rhonda Platt's folks just do a wonderful job. So that's my kudo for this morning.
Well, I second that. We went to the soiree, my daughter and I, and we had just an awfully nice time. We
was
really
nice
did.
evening.
It's kind of fun to get showered and brush your teeth and put on something nice, you know. It's kind of refreshing.
I will confess over the air that it was a little difficult for the old fellow's fingers to put in the studs in the tuxedo shirt. And Mrs. Gossett cannot see that well, so she couldn't help me. So before I got dressed, Mr. Fulton, and went over to the soiree, I had to go next door and have Mrs. Busby put my studs in my tux shirt. So,
and of course, Arthur's bitten me terribly. My fingers don't work too well either. So
okay, now
took longer than it would have about 40 years ago.
As we get into our proper section of Viewpoint this morning, I'd like to remind our listeners that our telephone number up here is 648-5510, and we would sincerely appreciate a call from time to time to show our guests that there's more than 2 of you out there listening to them. We try real hard to get good guests, and this morning we have a newcomer to the community, and I'd like for you to welcome him. So, Mrs. Busby, would you please introduce our guest this morning?
Proudly. I've only called poor John umpteen times, and he always had another fair going. Not a fair, but fair. And John Fulton is the County Extension Director for Sangamon, Logan, and Menard counties. And he's been very busy with the fairs, and that just moves right on into fall. And what's the prognosis for the fall time, Big John?
Yields are good, prices are down, the leaves will turn colors. Yeah.
There you go. Well, we've said it all. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Well, it's remarkable. I had a fellow tell me the other day, John, that insofar as yields are concerned, it's a poor field if it's 200 bushel. And he meant that, seriously, it was a poor field if it only got 200 bushel corn. This is again, as you say, the yields are up, the prices are down. Where does this year's, excuse me, please, I get all choked up when I talk about this. Seriously, where does this year's yield fall in relationship to other bumper years that you have experienced since you've been with us here?
Well, the proof will be in the Ag Statistics Service yield surveys that they send out, and they publish them along towards the end of February, early March. But indications are this is going to be the top one because we've never cracked a 200 bushel average in Logan County. There's only been a couple counties that have ever done it before, and when you look back into some of the 2004 was a real banner year, and last year was a very good year.
Yes, it sure was.
But, and there's always a danger when everybody's talking about big yields. They aren't all that way. There were fields that had problems with wetness and germination and so forth. So some of it's not all there.
Yeah.
But on the majority of them, the yields coming out are very good, and farmers are spending money drying some corn that, I was just talking to Jeff too, and basically, I said, if you figured up what last year's average price was, you could get by with 113 bushels of corn and make the same money as what you're talking at, well over 200 bushel this year at the price out of the field.
Interesting.
So there's not going to be much left on the table to pay rent and family living expense and so
just
forth.
Just because the yields are so big doesn't mean that income is going
there's
commensurately.
A lot of factors go into it, the strengthening dollar and some of those things as well. Those big marketing years are usually export markets, and that's all based on what the exchange rate is anymore. It's not what our price is, it's what they have to pay in their currency to get it. So with a weak dollar, it doesn't equate to that much money. That's the whole deal, when you get into these export markets. So as the dollar strengthens, that's going to hurt the exports. And of course, the use for ethanol and feed and all those kinds of things is, if you can grow as much as you want, if nobody uses it, it's worth nothing. So all those things will enter into it. So the strengthening livestock sector is very important to crop farmers because that's a user that's always here. It's in our country, and all those things, and also the ethanol industry that's producing ethanol to put in the gasoline, and the biodiesel on the soybean oil side. All those things are important pieces of the market, so they're going to be maybe equally as important as what the yields and production is.
Yeah, if you take a circle and make a pie chart, you find out when you get down to the end of the small part of the pie that's what's going to stay at the farmer's table after that. Now, John, just for purposes, I don't want to throw you a curve here, but I don't think I am with you. Let's follow a bushel of corn from the field to the consumer. How many processes will that take as it goes through the various middle persons coming out of the field at Burton View to the store here at Lincoln?
Well, actually,
the IGA store.
Most of what is grown in the fields is not direct consumption products. In other words, you're not eating most of this field corn. A little bit of it's used in some of the chips and so forth, but even most of that's specialty white corn or a specialty yellow corn. So most of what you see in the fields around here doesn't go to the table. It goes through livestock or through a processor. So most of it's going to go from the elevator to an ADM or Cargill or the old Pekin Energy Group to make ethanol, one of those processors. And then
they're all local, so to speak, right here in central Illinois.
In central Illinois, they sure are. The other option is to go from your elevator to a port, basically a terminal on the river, usually the Illinois River around here, Naples or Havana or whatever. Then they'll put it on a barge and ship it down to the Gulf, basically for an export market type situation. And they do the same thing with it when they get it to where it's going. They're going to process it. So very little of what you see directly produced here goes to your table. It usually will go, and of course you have the local livestock producers, for example. They will take that corn and then they will feed it to their livestock, and then it will go to a packing plant, and then it will go through the various stages of storage, transport, and even further processing, to get whatever you see in the grocery store.
Well, we have, excuse me, Judith, go right ahead, please.
On average, how much, what percent of the corn crop goes into ethanol?
Well, it's growing. I can't give an exact percentage, but it's greatly increased, and it's been a good thing. You look at what Brazil has done with their ethanol. They don't have gasoline in Brazil. Their vehicles are built to run on 100% alcohol, and that's basically what you get at the filling station in Brazil is 100% alcohol. They make the engines different. We have the flex fuels, but they're not as efficient when they run ethanol because the compression ratio isn't correct, and some of that they run well on it, but the mileage isn't very good.
Alcohol run cleaner and hotter?
Yes. Ever light alcohol on fire, you can't hardly tell it's on fire. It's a clear white flame. It's not like
yellow flame and all that.
It burns hot, and they use it in a lot of the racing tractor pull industry, all those high performance engines, and things run really well on it.
In your expanded duties, and several years ago they expanded your duties to include Sangamon and Menard County. Is that correct? With the other two counties that you serve?
Right.
And Logan. Has that had an impact on, well, certainly it's obviously had an impact on travel, but has that had an impact on your ability to fulfill your obligations to the farmers in the community?
Well, and with the reorganization that led to the multi-county units, the commercial ag program is essentially handled by folks that are at the research stations around the state. They have crops folks at DeKalb, Monmouth, the South Farms at Champaign and Brownstown. Then they have a couple beef people, and they're the ones that do the bulk of the heavy lifting for the winter meetings and the summer field days, and we've involved some of them here in our crop scouting workshops and that kind of thing. And the county directors are mostly administrative, and then you have other educators, and we have them in horticulture, the small farms locally grown that works with farmers markets, and some of the things that will go more directly to your table. And then we also have one in SNAP education for our unit that works with education for the low-income audiences on how to better budget and more nutritious food on a lesser expenditure type of program.
It can be pointed out, Judith K., excuse me, please, days gone by, what the farmer days gone by, sometimes in January and February they were out there in the field picking corn, called that shucking corn in those days, with pegs in their hands. But once that was done, then they kind of wrapped it up. They didn't have to worry until a short winter and then in the spring again. That's not so today. The farmer keeps busy all 12 months out of the year except for some vacation time.
Well, they did back then, too. Everybody had it in.
Well, if they had livestock.
They had livestock.
Yeah, you bet.
And they
all had livestock.
Yeah, and then as soon as they got the seed in, they were picking out the best ears because it was open pollinated, and a lot of them saved their own seed, years and years ago. But it's kind of interesting. This is the 100th anniversary of extension in the United States, and
happy anniversary.
That's the travel mug that I presented you with this morning. And somebody was laughing and said, you've been here for over a third of them. I said, thank you. Yeah.
I've got some news for you. I've been for 9/10 of them.
Yeah. So,
who was the first extension director here? I go back as far as J.H. Checkley. Was somebody before him? He might have been the first.
The first one was Isley, I believe.
I see.
Was his name.
Isley. Okay.
And that was in 1918. Logan, Menard, and Sangamon all chartered at the same time.
Is that right?
Back in the day, and you'll recall, Farm Bureau and Extension were synonymous. Mm-hmm. The Farm Advisor, going back into the Fred Hoppen era and even into the Brinkmeyer era, they were also the Farm Bureau manager. Mm-hmm. And to get an extension farm advisor, you had to sell 500 Farm Bureau memberships.
Oh, is that right?
And so they all chartered these counties December 1st of 1917, and I'm not sure about Sangamon and Menard, but Logan actually started in February of 1918 with an office. So I have the first annual report.
Interesting. Say, by the way, Judith and Jim, I'm going to brag on John's kids just a little bit. I asked him off air, his boys were out of this was their last year or so forth, and he informed me they're all out of school now. And we're going to give you just a couple of minutes to talk about those boys. They all have their degrees now, and I think that's worth a couple of seconds airtime.
You bet.
Well, yeah, real briefly, Andrew graduated with his master's in December and is an engineer for the Army Corps of Engineers Research Lab in Champaign, and David and Daniel, the twins, graduated in May with their bachelor's, and Daniel's a research agronomist for Agritech, which does a lot of contract work for Monsanto on production plots, and then David's working for United Prairie Ag Co-op over in the Champaign area. So
they followed in their parents' footsteps, didn't they, really?
Well, there's a lot of jobs in the agriculture sector.
Oh, yes.
And
the old people
I'll put that out there for everyone, and they're wide and varied as well.
Which brings me, that segues nicely into the fact that the Lincoln College is teaming up with the University of Illinois and their ag school and the ACES program here, and this is a great opportunity for some folks who can't get to the big school for the first year or two. They go through these courses here at Lincoln College, and they'll be accepted as juniors over at Champaign. So that's a great program.
Those are all great programs, and the University of Illinois is looking to expand those all the time. Our twins went through what they call the Pathways program with Parkland, where they actually were students at both Parkland and the university and lived in University of Illinois housing, and there were some benefits of paying some Parkland tuition for those first 2 years, and then guaranteed acceptance. And similar to the Lincoln College thing, they'll also have some advisor assistance from the University of Illinois folks to make sure what transfers and what path you need to be on for your degree. And ACES, agriculture, consumer, environmental science, is not just agriculture anymore either. That includes the home economics, the natural resources, and several other things.
Including agriculture and communications.
Sure.
Which is a big thing.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I've got several relatives in that business.
Good.
And,
speaking of communications, we have to communicate the fact that our sponsors are very happy to make you available to them. So we will honor our sponsors right now and then come right back live into the studio. And we're right back live in the studio here this morning. Program's Viewpoint. And this is Busby and myself, old fella. I've been doing this a couple of weeks now. And we're going to try to get it right before we get done. Our guest this morning is a very, very well-known gentleman here in Logan County. Does a whale of a job, not just for the farmers as clients, but for the community, because as he imparts his wisdom and expertise to the farmers, that kind of passes down to the rest of Logan County, because as they go well, so goes the county. Just off the record, just right off the hat here, John, what's the worst year we ever had crop-wise in your memory? You know, I throw these things at John just off the wall, and it isn't like we talked about this.
It's like you give him a test.
Well, the 80s era was pretty rough. I believe 83 was probably about the worst.
Why do you say that? What happened?
Major droughts in 80, 83, and 88.
But you know, last year it sure seemed like a drought to me. And
well, it was dry the last half of last year. The prior year in 2012 was a drought, but our corn yields, you know, there was still a lot of 40 to 80 bushel corn yields on the low end, and some of them were up in the 130s. The genetics has come a long way in improving yield potential. And soybeans that year, that was when Hurricane Isaac blew through in right about 1st September, and there was some 50 bushel soybeans in the middle of a drought year. So,
which is remarkable.
Yeah, but the 83 year was pretty tough. I think the corn on our place made 17 that year.
Oh, gracious.
So
you go ahead. You made yourself a note, so I don't want.
We were talking off air about programs that are available to young people. Now, what if a person in high school wanted to go into the businesses your sons are going into? You mentioned the big implement dealers, factories have programs that sponsor kids. How does a young person go about finding out? Oh, I'm trying to be the cat person besides.
This is highly entertaining, Judy.
Well, you should have been here when the cat brought the bird in.
I'm sorry, you folks off air can't catch this. It's a little sleight of hand on the part of Mrs. Busby there.
So anyway, how does a person go about finding out about all these programs available? Bill's talking about the one from Lincoln College. You talk about the one from Parkland. How does a kid find out about all this?
Well,
boys or girls?
You have to be aggressive, and hopefully you have a good guidance counselor who's familiar with some of these things.
That's an important thing, the guidance counselor.
Talk to others who are following along or leading along in the same lines that you might be interested in. And I will say, as I went through school and my wife went through everything and my kids and everything, these internships and relationships are very important to make those connections, to find out about those things and be the people that they're willing to sponsor and give some training to, and then hopefully hire you as an employee because they have an investment in you after you've gone through some of these internship opportunities with them. And particularly with the John Deere, Case IH, and the Caterpillar and so forth programs, you actually have a work portion of that program where you will go to school in kind of segments and then go back and work at a dealership. And then the expectation is upon completion of the program, you're back there with them for a period of time because they're helping to greatly fund the educational part.
So if you worked for one of those implement companies and they were sending you to school, the goal then would be that you could come back to those companies and you would be able to counsel a prospective buyer at the dealership.
Most of them are related to the mechanical aspects, so they're doing repair work and setup of equipment and some of those things. I'm not totally familiar with if they get into the parts and that kind of thing, but what they're doing is growing an employee from within.
Right.
So
that's a good deal. We had such talk a number of years ago But you were already here when these confined operations were cropping up around the county. I haven't heard anybody talk about them for a number of years now.
You mean the livestock operations? Right. They're become part of the countryside, and they try and be good neighbors. And yes, sometimes there's some odor, but if you have a large number of animals of any kind in a small area, they're going to have some odor associated with it, but they try and do things right. They've even modified their feeding programs to have less of the odor and the manure and so forth, and some of the mechanical environmental things they can do, such as planting windbreaks at certain intervals to knock down any dust or something that's coming from them. And one of the first major ones in country was Albert Gelbaugh that started the confinement livestock business, kind of, and the Paulus and Conradys and so forth. This was kind of a hotbed for them, but it's a lot of it's in the management of those facilities, and it's important because not everybody has or wants to have livestock, and to produce the amount required that people want to buy at the grocery store eventually, it takes those concentrated operations.
Right.
The younger list. Go ahead, Judy.
In northern Minnesota, I've seen a couple of humongous confined operations that are turkeys. Now, we've not had anything like that here in Logan County, have we?
No, the closest was probably Twists over at Weldon in DeWitt County.
Gelbaugh's way back when I was a kid at Turkey Farm.
Oh, is that right?
Not in the vein of which you allude, but...
but those are processor-driven. They're almost all direct contracted with a processor, whether it's
they go directly
Butterball or whatever company it is, and so they want them within such and such a radius of their plant for the transportation issue.
And that's exactly the scenario that I see when I see these big turkey operations, just right across the highway. There's the plant.
And they may actually be part owned by that processor. A lot of them are cooperatives, and they sell to the various companies, but the farmers band together, and they'll get a dozen of them that'll raise a lot of turkeys, and they'll build their own processing plant for their turkeys then.
Yeah, quote, the good old days when I was speaking of the Gelbaugh turkey, they didn't have any middle person. I think they went directly from the farm to the consumer.
Right.
And that's just the way it was done. John, 648-5510, by the way. Somebody might have a question about John's affiliation with the University of Illinois, which brings me to the question I wanted to ask you. A lot of folks don't have any cognizance whatsoever of what the University of Illinois Extension program is. Could you just touch lightly on that, bearing in mind that we only have 10 minutes left? Seriously.
This is my elevator speech, right? we're the outreach version of the University of Illinois. We're to take their research that they do on campus and transfer it to the citizens of the state. And we've changed a lot through the years, and the program focus changes some. It started as agriculture, 4-H, and home economics, and we're still doing those things, but you can't hardly find a college of any of those anymore. Agriculture, they all have some family and consumer name or
different versions.
Yeah. But anyhow, it's the transfer of that research-based information, and then also helping people solve problems or communities, and that's where the community development aspect has come in, and a lot of our staff are involved in various task forces and work groups and those kinds of things to do youth initiatives or nutrition or budgeting for low income, those kinds of things. But it's basically helping to leverage the university's resources and bringing them out to the citizens.
The bottom line is it has a direct impact on Mr. and Mrs. Consumer, because as the work of the extension in the University of Illinois and other states have the same situation. As their farmers become more proficient and better farmers and better stewards of the land, that inures to the benefit of Joe and Margie Smith out there on Main Street.
Sure. And as I said earlier, we've really gone beyond those original scopes, of just the farm, and then we branched into the horticulture and so forth. And, we have some flagship programs that people are probably maybe even more familiar with than what they are with the extension service. And basically those would be 4-H and the Master Gardeners, the Master Naturalists. All those things are run out of the local extension offices for those particular communities, and there's still sizable programs with a lot of volunteer input and a very passionate group of people involved in all those programs.
You mentioned Master Gardener. I was going to ask you about that, but now I'm not aware of the Master Naturalist program. What does that involve?
That's along the same lines, where there'll be some fairly intensive training for about 10 full days, and then people will volunteer at various places. And we have a few currently doing it out at the Kickapoo Creek Park area and some other sites around the area, and they'll probably get involved with the Lincoln College group, with Dennis's group at some point in time. But in other counties where they're a little more established, but it's a little different than Master Gardeners, because Master Gardeners kind of tend to stay volunteering for us, where Master Naturalists, we train people and they volunteer for other agencies and organizations for the most part.
And what sort of work do they do on a general basis?
They may help design wildflower walk trails, do tree identification things, lead educational activities at certain sites, those kinds of activities.
Well, up here at the
Creekside?
Yeah, well, yes, the Creekside in Atlanta, we've had those people on that that big park area up by Funk's Grove there. They have a lot of prairie grasses, etc.
They're very involved out of the McLean County group.
That's a neat place up there, by the way.
Sure is.
John, I'd like to point out to the listeners that your services extend far beyond serving Mr. and Mrs. Farmer out there. I wouldn't begin to guess the number of calls you get from John or Maxine Smith right here in Lincoln, Illinois, about this tree or that shrub. That's an ancillary service that you offer to the folks, and a great service. Could you comment about that phase of your professional activities here in this county?
Well, it's really become more of the work than what the agriculture part has been, because of the both the reduction in the numbers of agriculture professionals involved in the business, and also some of the service companies and other industry folks taking over part of those roles as well. And so really the horticulture program, I remember doing a column and starting that in 1983, and that's gone and gone and gone, and that's one of the biggest areas of interest in our web pages that we offer. And it's kind of interesting. I think the last 4 months we've averaged 58,000 hits on our web pages locally over those months.
That's remarkable. Yeah. Now, what kind of questions are they asking?
You name it.
Yeah.
I probably ought to be writing them down and publish memoirs or a book or something sometime. Yeah, I'm always leery when somebody carries something in a cardboard box and says, "I think it's dead."
Oh, gosh. Oh, my word.
There's a snake under my car. Do you mind crawling under and seeing what kind? Yeah.
Oh, dear.
You've had that.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
but
dear.
Most of the time it's some kind of identification or how to control something in the lawn, or diseases of vegetables, those kinds of things. It's wide flung.
I have something in my yard that's burrowing, and I thought it might be those cicada killer wasps. Could that be so?
Well, it depends on how
Little
deep.
burrow.
Why don't you bring one in?
About size of a nickel
In a
and
box
about that
and say,
deep.
I think. I don't know how deep it is. I didn't stick my finger in there. I'm not as dumb as I
If
look.
you can see the bottom of it, you probably got a skunk in the neighborhood, and he's digging
We
grubs
do.
out.
We do have
We
skunks.
do, in fact.
That's
and
what they do.
raccoons. Isn't that what we have, raccoons?
Yeah, I can't smell a raccoon, but I can smell skunk. So
Yeah.
I do know we've had them in there.
So if they're about size of a nickel and less than a couple inches deep, they're digging grubs out.
Grubs, yeah, I know they do that. They did that at my folks' cabin, and they turned over a little piece of sod.
Yeah.
They'd come in the night and forage.
Yep.
And then you'd have to go out in the
So
day and put
now
the
you don't
sod
have
in.
to treat grubs.
Well,
There you go. They took care of that. Is there one question that the average consumer here in town, not your farm clients, is there one question that your average would ask the most? Is there anything that stands out, or is my tree dying?
Well,
That would be the question, maybe.
what's wrong with my tree? I don't want it to die is probably one of the top ones.
I bet.
Unfortunately, in an old community, things do have lifespans. And as they
Yeah.
start to decline, they have more problems. But, we've gone through some of those waves, as we've gotten into this type of tree. We planted all of them everywhere, and they got the Dutch elm disease, for example,
Oh,
and
gosh,
so
yes.
they all died, and we replaced a lot of those with ash trees. Well, we're waiting on that shoe to fall.
right,
And,
exactly.
we planted an awful lot of red maples. Everybody seems to have 3 or 4 of them. They're beautiful trees, and they grow quick, and there's been a lot more problems, partly because of the number of the trees, but if they're stressed, they tend to get verticillium wilt, which plugs up the tissue in them, and then they start dying off. And we've been through the pin oak era. We didn't know at the time we planted them that 40 years was going to be an old one.
Oh, yeah,
But,
well,
they've gotten a lot of bacterial leaf scorch that you can't do anything about in our part of the country, and so they went from the number 1 planted tree to not recommended in 2 years' time.
Where does the clump birch fall in this category? I think mine has come a cropper. We're gonna have to cut that down. That just really grieves me to take that down.
Well, everybody comes along with the new, best, latest, and greatest, I guess, and everything has a place, and you can take good care of things that are acclimated, and that's the other part is a lot of our problems, like evergreens, very few of them really thrive in the Illinois-type climate. White pines have grown well, and then they started having some problems, and we're seeing that now. It's not really a problem, but because of the drought years, those effects will carry for 7 years.
really.
And as you get moisture and then a dry period like we've had, suddenly all the old needles on the white pine turn brown at once, and everybody thinks they're dying. But as long as those tips are green, you're okay, because all evergreens only keep 1 to 4 years worth of growth on the outside. That's why it's a dead area in the middle. And so all those needles are turning brown at once, and so it looks like something's wrong. In a normal weather pattern and year, they would gradually have a yellow one here and there, and drop off, and you get another one. But this year, all the old growth at once is turning color. So there's lots of things, and it's an interesting and gratifying to help folks, I guess, at least get an answer. I don't know if you can solve the problem, but
They do get answers. They do get answers. John Fulton, our guest this morning here at Viewpoint, an integral part of our community. With the man has a sponge for a brain, and cornucopia. Now,
Thanks, I
by
think.
that, that's a compliment. That's I don't mean dead. I mean a live sponge. He's an amazing gentleman. He just has facts and figures that come right off the top, and we're lucky to have a gentleman like that in our midst. This morning, we're talking about agriculture primarily. Our closing quote would be, "The farmer is always raising things, but never as much as the middleman." Thank you for Viewpoint.